My wife texted at 6:47 a.m., "You're not coming to Europe. The kids want their real father." By that afternoon, I disappeared. Okay, Reddit. My name is Daniel. I'm 36 years old, I work in logistics management, and this is the story of how everything ended long before that text ever arrived. The proposal happened on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, in a public plaza outside a renovated train station. Street musicians played near the fountain. People were everywhere, families, tourists, couples holding phones out in front of them like shields. It wasn't flashy. No flash mob. No fireworks. Just a bench, a coffee kiosk, and the place where we'd met 3 years earlier while waiting for delayed trains. She liked public moments. She said they made things feel real. I didn't love them, but I understood the language. So I chose the plaza, waited until the music softened, and asked her to stand with me near the fountain. I got down on one knee. I didn't give a speech. I said her name, asked if she'd marry me, and held out the ring. The laughter came before the answer. Not a gasp. Not silence. Laughter, sharp, surprised, immediate. The kind that isn't joy. The kind that travels fast. Someone behind us said, "Oh my God," and someone else snorted. A phone camera tilted higher. She didn't touch the ring. She didn't even look at it at first. She looked at her friends. Mira was there. Always was. Mira covered her mouth, eyes wide, then leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear. My girlfriend, my future wife at the time, smiled, shook her head, and stepped back. "Daniel," she said, still smiling, "this is a lot." That was it. No pause. No private aside. No attempt to soften it. I stood up. I nodded once, as if she'd told me the weather. Someone laughed again. Louder. A stranger. That's what made it worse. The way strangers felt invited. She added, "I mean, did you really think I'd say yes like this?" I noticed things instead of reacting. The way the fountain pump clicked on and off. The way the musician restarted his song because the moment was over. The way Mira's eyes darted, gauging the crowd. I said, "Okay." Not why. Not what do you mean. Just okay. That seemed to confuse her. Confusion flickered across her face, replaced quickly by something else, relief, maybe. Or control. She laughed again, softer this time. "You're being dramatic." I put the ring back in its box. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me later, when I thought about it. In the moment, my body felt efficient, like it was following instructions written a long time ago. A woman nearby said, like this was a show that ended badly. I said, "I'll give you some space, because that's what calm people say when they're trying not to humiliate someone further." Mira stepped forward. "Daniel, don't make this weird," she said, already smiling at her phone. I met Mira's eyes for a second. I didn't glare. I didn't plead. I just said, "I'm not." Then I walked away. That was the humiliation. It was fast. Efficient. Over before my brain could generate the emotion everyone expected. I took the long route home. Not because I needed time, but because I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of watching me leave quickly. I bought a coffee I didn't drink. I watched a street performer reset his props. I let the afternoon continue without me. My phone vibrated twice. I didn't check it. At home, I placed the ring box on the kitchen counter and went to shower. The water was too hot. I didn't adjust it. I stood there until my skin prickled and my thoughts finally slowed. The first message came while I was drying off. She didn't mean it like that. The second followed immediately. "Mira says you should talk." I didn't reply. That night, she came home late. She dropped her bag by the door and sighed dramatically, as if she'd had a long day instead of a public victory. "You just left," she said. That was kind of cold. I looked at her. Really looked. She was waiting for something, anger probably. Or an apology she could reject again, this time privately. "I didn't want to put you on the spot," I said. "That's what proposing is," she replied, rolling her eyes. "A spot." "Then you handled it," I said. She frowned. "You're acting weird." "I'm acting calm." She laughed once, short. Same thing. We didn't talk about it after that. Not really. She told people it had been awkward, and that she'd been blindsided. She framed it like a misunderstanding, like I'd misread the room. Mira amplified it. Commented heart emojis. Posted a vague story about men who don't listen. I watched it all without engaging. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I did laundry. I maintained the routine she depended on without adding anything extra. The embarrassment arrived later, like a delayed echo. At work the following week, a colleague asked, "So big weekend?" in a tone that told me he already knew. I nodded. Not really. He laughed nervously. Yeah. Saw something on Instagram. I didn't ask what he saw. I didn't need to. I felt it anyway, the flattening of something private into content. That night, she tried again. "You're punishing me," she said from the couch, legs tucked under her, "by pretending nothing happened." "I'm not pretending," I said. "Nothing is happening." "That's worse," she replied. "At least be mad." I shook my head. I don't need to perform. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. This was the first crack, not the rejection, but the realization that I wouldn't react on cue. That I wouldn't argue, wouldn't beg, wouldn't demand reassurance. That I wouldn't give her a scene to repair publicly. Mira texted me directly that night. "First time ever. You embarrassed her today by acting like it didn't matter." I read it once. Then I put my phone face down. The humiliation had done its job. It had marked me publicly. But it hadn't broken me the way it was designed to. I didn't feel angry yet. I felt, noted. Like something important had been written down quietly, somewhere inside me, to be reviewed later. I went to bed early. She stayed up, scrolling. In the dark, the crowd noise from the plaza replayed, not loud, just present. A reminder. Not of pain. Of information. I didn't confront her. That was the first thing that unsettled everyone. No follow-up conversation. No "we need to talk." No emotional inventory. I didn't bring up the plaza. I didn't bring up the laughter. I didn't bring up Mira. Instead, I removed myself in ways so subtle they took time to register. I stopped anticipating her needs. Not dramatically. I didn't announce it. I just didn't do the extra things. I didn't remind her about appointments. I didn't refill her favorite snacks when I went to the store. I didn't stay up late waiting for her if she said she'd be home around 10. When she spoke, I listened. When she stopped, I didn't chase the silence. I mirrored her casualness literally. If she said, "It's not a big deal," I treated it like it wasn't. If she shrugged, I accepted the shrug as final. That's what people don't understand about calm. They think it's passive. It isn't. It's precise. She noticed the first week. "You're distant," she said one morning, tying her shoes by the door. "I'm here," I replied, not looking up from my coffee. "That's not the same." "It's not different either." She stared at me, waiting for something sharper. It didn't come. Mira escalated. She started showing up more. Dropping by accidentally. Staying too long. Laughing too loud. She'd bring up the proposal in that fake light tone people use when they want to reopen a wound without admitting it. "Honestly," she said once, flipping her hair back, "it was kind of brave of you. Like misguided but brave." I nodded. Okay. That was it. One word. Mira blinked. She tried again. "You don't seem embarrassed." "I don't feel embarrassed." "Well," she said, smiling thinly, "most people would." "I'm not most people." That wasn't a flex. It was a statement of fact. But it landed heavier than anything else I could have said. At home my girlfriend, still my girlfriend then, started fishing. She'd bring up weddings casually. Point out rings on strangers. Send me videos of proposals that went viral. "Cute, right?" she'd say, watching my face. "They seem happy," I'd answer. That's when her tone shifted. "You're acting like you don't care." "I care," I said. "I just don't need to broadcast it." She scoffed. "You're punishing me." "I'm not your prop." The words surprised both of us. They came out calm, even but final. She went quiet after that. Not wounded, calculating. The control started slipping in small ways. She stopped being sure of her footing. She'd start sentences, then abandon them. She'd watch me from across the room like she was waiting for me to break character. I didn't change my routines out of spite. I changed them because they were no longer mutual. I ate when I was hungry, slept when I was tired, went to the gym alone instead of waiting for her schedule. When she asked where I was going, I answered plainly. Out. Where? Just out. It drove her insane. One night, she picked a fight on purpose. I could tell. The setup was clumsy. You don't compliment me anymore, she said, arms crossed. I compliment when it's sincere. So it's not sincere now? I didn't say that. You're doing that thing, she snapped. Talking around it. I'm talking directly. She laughed bitterly. God, you're exhausting. I'm not auditioning anymore. That line landed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I saw it then, the first real flicker of fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing control of the narrative. Mira noticed too. She started posting more. Stories about emotional unavailability. Quotes about men who check out instead of growing up. Always vague. Always angled. People messaged me screenshots. You okay, man? Is this about you? I didn't respond. That was the other withdrawal, social. I stopped defending myself preemptively. I stopped correcting assumptions. I let silence do what explanations never could. At dinner one night, she finally cracked. Do you even want to be with me? She asked, eyes shiny, voice carefully unstable. I took a bite of my food. Chewed. Swallowed. Yes, I said. If this is how you want things to be. What does that mean? It means I'm accepting what you've shown me. That's not fair. I didn't say it was. She slammed her fork down. Say something. Fight for me. I looked at her then, really looked and said why. The question hung there. Not aggressive. Curious. She didn't have an answer. Mira didn't have a script for that one. From that moment on, every attempt to provoke me became more obvious. She cried once, loudly, in the bedroom with the door open. I stayed in the living room, reading. She stopped crying when she realized I wasn't listening. She tried being affectionate out of nowhere. I accepted it, but didn't cling. Didn't reciprocate beyond what was offered. She tried jealousy. Mentioned an ex casually. I nodded. Do you care? She asked. I heard you. That's not what I asked. I answered. The calm became unsettling. Not because it was cold, but because it was consistent. Consistency is power. People who manipulate rely on volatility. On emotional spikes they can ride and redirect. I gave her a flat surface. Nothing to grab. Mira confronted me in the kitchen one afternoon while my girlfriend was in the shower. You're hurting her, she said, low voice, like we were co-conspirators. I'm not doing anything. That's the problem. I met her eyes. Trauma explains fear. It doesn't explain laughing at me. She flushed. You're twisting things. No, I said. I'm leaving them as they are. She left shortly after. Slammed the door. That night, my girlfriend asked, what did you say to Mira? I answered her question. About what? About boundaries. She scoffed. Since when do you have boundaries? I smiled faintly. Since I needed them. She turned away from me in bed. For the first time since the plaza, I felt something stir. Not anger. Clarity. The silence stretched. Days. Weeks. The more I withdrew, the louder her world got. More posts. More friends checking in. More pressure to react, to perform the role of the wounded man who begs forgiveness or explodes on cue. I did neither. That's when she started planning something bigger. I didn't know the shape of it yet, but I could feel the shift. People don't escalate when they're winning. They escalate when they're losing. And she was losing control. I didn't see it coming, even though I should have. The moment of revelation wasn't dramatic, didn't happen with shouting or confrontation. It happened in a coffee shop on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at a corner table, reading reports for work on my laptop. The barista knew me by name and had already poured a double espresso before I reached the counter. I was alone, intentionally, and letting the hum of normalcy occupy the room. That's when she appeared. Not her sister, Claire. I froze for a fraction of a second. Not out of fear, but because I didn't expect anyone from that orbit to speak honestly. Claire had nothing to gain here. She didn't post on social media. She didn't text, didn't whisper updates to mutual friends. She sat across from me, calm, measured, almost painfully neutral. "Daniel," she said, not waiting for me to speak. "I think it's time you heard the truth." I nodded. "Go ahead." She sighed, then began recounting the events of that day in the plaza. Not colored by emotion, not framed as gossip. Just facts. "The proposal," she started, "wasn't accidental. It wasn't spontaneous. It was rehearsed." She had been planning the public humiliation for weeks. I raised an eyebrow. She didn't flinch. "Mira coached her," Claire continued. "Every line, every pause, every laugh. They talked about your reaction, about making it viral, about how witnesses would interpret it." I felt the corners of my mouth tighten. Not anger. Not triumph. Just recognition. She wanted it to look effortless. Like she was naturally rejecting you, but also like the audience, friends, strangers, even your colleagues, would find her charming. That was the goal. I let that sink in. "She didn't expect you to beg or yell. That's why you didn't," Claire said. "And that's why it didn't break her. You being calm, disinterested, consistent, it undermined her plan. It wasn't just the reaction, it was that your reaction didn't fit their narrative. It exposed them." I thought about the plaza, the laughter, the phones, the way she smiled at Mira's whisper. It all clicked into place. The amusement wasn't genuine, it was an act. Every glance and smirk, calibrated. Every reaction from bystanders, intentionally provoked. "Your calm wasn't a mistake," Claire said. "It was the only thing that stopped them from completing the performance they had rehearsed for you. They were counting on you to feed the scene, either panic, pleading, embarrassment. You didn't. And it drove them mad. That's why you're seeing the escalation now." I exhaled slowly. "So it wasn't personal?" "In one sense, yes," she said. "It was personal in planning, not in feeling. She wanted attention and validation. The moral cost to you was irrelevant. You were a prop. That's what she told Mira. Make him the punchline. Make it public. The rest doesn't matter." It clicked in a different way now. What had felt like a private betrayal was actually a social experiment. I wasn't just rejected, I was weaponized for spectacle. "She's strategic," Claire said, leaning back in her chair. "You think it was emotion. It wasn't. It was theater. And now she's doubling down because the audience didn't respond the way she expected. That's why she escalates with posts, stories, and performative crises. It's all calculated. She's learning to manipulate in real time, but the rules are different when the subject isn't performing." I nodded slowly. So everything after the plaza, the withdrawal, the distance, it was effective not because I reacted poorly, but because I refused to participate. Claire smiled faintly. "Exactly. Most people would have played along in some way. Even silence can be performative. You gave none of it. That's why she's unraveling now." I looked at her, realizing that all the chaos I'd witnessed since the proposal, the Instagram stories, the awkward confrontations, the emotional fishing, Mira's interventions, were secondary to a truth I hadn't known before. I hadn't been emotionally outmaneuvered. I had simply opted out of the game. Claire continued. "She may have the audience, but she doesn't have control over you. That's why she's desperate. She's trying to rewrite history publicly, but you aren't participating. She can't manufacture your vulnerability, so she's improvising and failing. The performance will collapse." I didn't say anything. I simply listened, the espresso cooling beside me. There was a quiet satisfaction in understanding. Not gloating. Not triumph. Just clarity. "She planned the humiliation," Claire repeated. "Public. With witnesses. Designed to humiliate you without remorse. You were the main character in her narrative of herself, but you weren't allowed the script. Your calm disrupted it. That's why everything since has been escalating, attempts to regain the narrative, to pull you back into the story they wrote for you. I thought about how often people misunderstand calm. They assume it's weakness. They assume a lack of spectacle equals passivity. But calm is a weapon in itself, especially against those who crave reaction. Claire leaned forward slightly. Daniel, I want you to understand, this isn't about her feelings for you. It never was. It was about control, attention, validation. You were just the instrument. That's why you need to maintain your pace. Don't give her the scene. Don't react on cue. You're already winning by staying out of her narrative. I nodded. I wasn't planning retaliation. I wasn't planning an argument. I wasn't planning a showdown. I simply absorbed the clarity. She had weaponized social optics. I had refused to be the ammunition. That was the difference. So, I said finally, all the escalation, all the posts, all the drama, it's just improvisation now? Yes, Claire said calmly. Because the original script failed. Her words reframed everything. The humiliation, the laughter, the social chaos, they weren't random cruelties or emotional whims. They were deliberate strategies. And I had neutralized them without lifting a finger, without raising my voice, without performing for the audience. You're not the main character, Claire said, repeating one of the lines she'd heard my girlfriend use in private conversations. But you also don't have to participate. That's the leverage. That's the power. The room felt lighter after she spoke. Not because a solution had been offered, there wasn't one, but because the confusion and self-doubt that had been creeping in for weeks evaporated. It wasn't that I had failed. It wasn't that I had been outplayed. I simply hadn't played. And Daniel, Claire said as she stood to leave, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Calm doesn't mean nothing. Silence doesn't mean surrender. What they wanted from you was a performance. You gave them none. That's why they're losing. I watched her go, the door clicking softly behind her. For the first time, I understood the full dimensions of what had happened. The orchestration, the rehearsal, the audience, the manipulation. And I understood the precise psychological effect I had produced simply by refusing to participate. Everything up until now, the withdrawal, the restraint, the calm detachment, it had not been passive. It had been active. Calculated. Unshakable. That was the midpoint twist. The revelation that transformed my narrative from victimhood into clarity. My calm wasn't just patience, it was exposure. My silence wasn't absence, it was proof. And my non-performance wasn't avoidance, it was dominance. From that day on, I knew how the rest of the story would unfold, not in my hands, but because the strategy of exposure had already begun to work. The stage had been set, and the audience, the manipulators, and the enablers had all miscalculated the main variable, me. I left the coffee shop without another word. Outside, the city continued its usual rhythm. Cars hummed past. People laughed, argued, hurried. I walked deliberately. My pace slow. My posture unremarkable. Yet every step felt precise, each moment calibrated, not for spectacle, not for revenge, but for the quiet inevitability of what was coming. I had learned the rules of the game. And now, the manipulators themselves would be the ones performing for an audience they could no longer control. This wasn't a victory yet. It wasn't even the climax. It was a revelation, the pivot that reframed everything, the lens through which every future interaction would be understood. And for the first time, I wasn't just calm. I was confident. Unshakable. Untouchable. Because now I understood the truth. The rejection had been intentional, the humiliation rehearsed, the audience manipulated, and my refusal to play had already begun rewriting the story entirely. It happened on a Saturday again, in the same plaza where the original proposal had taken place. Not by accident. That had become obvious over the weeks. She had been orchestrating a public do-over, complete with Mira coaching from the sidelines, subtle nods to friends, and an audience of tourists and locals who had no idea what they were about to witness. I arrived early, as usual. Calm. Deliberate. Not because I was trying to outmaneuver her, just because that was how I functioned. My posture was neutral, my gaze steady, my timing unhurried. The fountain burbled as if nothing had happened here before. People walked past, coffee in hand, dogs on leashes, unaware that they were about to witness a performance failing in real time. She approached with purpose. The smile was precise, rehearsed. She carried herself like someone who had memorized the moves of a scene she expected to control. Mira lingered near the kiosk, phone raised just enough to film. I noticed the audience she'd assembled, a few mutual friends, a couple of curious strangers, a photographer Mira had somehow persuaded to capture the moment. She spoke first. "Daniel," she said, voice soft but performative, "I've realized. I overreacted last time. Can we start over?" The words were a script I had been expecting. The subtle manipulation, designed to make me look hesitant, embarrassed, or eager, was all in the delivery. Her smile was calculated to prompt a specific response. I didn't respond immediately. I looked at her. Looked at Mira. Looked at the people milling around, some of whom had cameras, some of whom were just curious passers-by. I didn't smile. I didn't hesitate. I just stood there. You want to start over?" she asked, scanning the crowd for validation. "I'm listening," I said. Calm, unflinching. The first attempt at the performance was subtle. She knelt. Just like before. Held out a hand instead of a ring. Eyes wide. Waiting. "Will you?" I didn't respond the way she expected. I didn't drop to one knee. I didn't bend toward her, didn't reach for her hand, didn't mirror her theatrics. I stood tall, neutral. The crowd stirred. You could feel the tension. Some smiled nervously. Others whispered to one another, sensing something was off. Mira's smile tightened. She glanced at my expression and then at her friend, trying to cue the next part of the script. She tried again. I thought maybe we could." Her words faltered under the weight of expectation. The audience had been promised drama. They were getting stillness. I interrupted gently. Not mockingly. Not cruelly. Just clearly. "If you want to perform, you'll have to do it properly." Her brow furrowed. "Do what?" "The proposal," I said. "You wanted me to be a part of it last time. Now, if we're recreating this for the audience, you'll need to be the one doing what you asked of me before." The plaza went quiet. Mira gasped softly. A couple of people murmured. She stared at me, processing. Her eyes darted from my calm face to the bystanders. Then back to me. The manipulation had failed. The script had collapsed. I don't understand," she said, voice rising slightly. "I thought. You wanted a public display," I said. "You wanted me to be on my knees. You wanted attention. You wanted witnesses. Here they are. And here we are. If you want the performance, you'll need to fulfill your part." She blinked, silent. The audience was watching. The expectation of spectacle was pressing down on her like a weight. The rehearsed lines she had practiced, the rehearsed smiles, the rehearsed hand gestures, all failed to ignite the scene she'd envisioned. She stammered. The public faltered. The performance, once under her control, now recoiled. Her confidence wavered. I said nothing more. I simply waited. Calm. Unmoving. Unflinching. Then slowly, she dropped to one knee. Not with elegance, not with grace, not with the assured smile she had practiced. Trembling fingers, uneven posture, faltering voice. She held out a hand as if asking me to mirror her request. The irony was absolute. The public was witnessing the manipulator become the manipulated. I raised my hand in refusal. Not mockery, not anger. Just refusal. "I'm not auditioning anymore," I said. Quietly. Clearly. Firmly. A few people whispered. One or two laughed nervously. Mira's phone slipped slightly in her hand. My girlfriend, once confident, once orchestrating the crowd, now struggled to maintain composure. The air around her was electric with panic disguised as performance. She tried to recover. "Daniel, this isn't fair. You can't." "I'm not your prop," I said. The words landed with precision. Not an insult, not a condemnation. Just truth. She rose slowly, hand shaking, and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I guess that's that," she said, attempting casualness. But the tension betrayed her. Every movement now was clumsy. Every glance to the audience desperate. Mira interjected, voice slightly higher than intended. It's okay. We can just try again later. I nodded once. No, that's enough. The crowd began to murmur more audibly. The intended drama, the manipulation, the public spectacle, had inverted. The person who had been strategic and commanding now looked exposed, vulnerable, and undeniably human in a way she hadn't anticipated. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak further. I simply stepped back. Calm, neutral, consistent. That alone amplified her collapse. She tried one last move. Tears. A shaky voice. Please, can't we just? I shook my head. No. No cruelty. No theatrics. No public shaming. Just clarity. The audience watched, captivated. This was not revenge. It was exposure. The manipulator, once confident, was now forced to act out the very scene she had scripted for me. And she could not sustain it. Eventually, she left. Mira lingered briefly, then left too. The plaza returned to its normal rhythm. Footsteps, distant conversations, a bird landing on the fountain's edge. But the echoes of the failed performance lingered in the air, and I could feel them. Not because I had sought to humiliate, but because truth had revealed itself in front of witnesses. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to justify. The collapse spoke for itself. Later, when friends approached me, hesitant, whispering about what just happened, I simply nodded. Neutral. No commentary. The story of exposure had been delivered. The audience, the manipulators, even casual bystanders, everyone had seen it unfold. She had attempted to rewrite history in a public spectacle. I refused to perform. That refusal became the story. The inversion of roles, the collapse of control, the subtle but undeniable clarity, it was all already understood by anyone who had witnessed it. By the time I walked away from the plaza, the sun was dipping low. The fountain splashed quietly. Tourists wandered past, unaware they'd just witnessed the unraveling of a carefully constructed manipulation. I didn't look back. And in that refusal, in that calm detachment, the lesson was clear: exposure does not require revenge. It requires clarity, consistency, and the courage to refuse the performance that others demand. She had orchestrated, performed, and attempted control. The audience expected me to react, to give them drama, to be a part of her narrative. But when I refused, the entire structure collapsed in front of them. And that, I realized, was more powerful than any retaliation could ever be. The morning after the plaza scene, I woke to the faint hum of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I didn't rush to it. I had learned that urgency rarely yielded clarity. When I finally picked it up, my eyes skimmed over notifications that carried the predictable patterns of panic, spin, and misdirection. My girlfriend, or rather the ex, though the label felt irrelevant, had already started her social media campaign. The first story she posted was vague, a short video of the plaza fountain captioned, "Some lessons are hard to teach. Some people never learn." No faces. No explicit context. But enough insinuation to spark speculation. Comments poured in immediately. Friends chimed with supportive emojis. Strangers made assumptions. Mira, predictably, amplified the narrative, posting cryptic captions and screenshots that framed her as the wronged party, the victim of cold indifference. I read everything. Not once did I respond. Not a like, not a comment, not a correction. The calm I had maintained through weeks of orchestrated drama was a shield, and I kept it intact. The next post was more aggressive, a reel of the plaza, zoomed in on her kneeling with a caption, "Some people make you beg for what should be freely given. Some people don't deserve the second chance." She clearly expected a reaction, a public defense, an emotional plea, any crack in my composure. I did nothing. Instead, I let silence operate as its own statement. In the world of constant social validation, non-performance becomes loud. The absence of reaction forced the audience to think. Some followers began questioning the narrative. Friends whispered. The casual observers, the ones who had watched the failed performance, could piece together what had really happened. That afternoon, Claire, the sister who had given me clarity weeks before, posted publicly, succinctly and without drama. "Just for the record, Daniel did not react to manipulation. Everything staged in the plaza was planned by X and her friends. Calm isn't cruelty. Refusing to participate isn't indifference. That's all. It was short, precise, verified the facts without editorializing. No emotive words, no hashtags, no calls to witness loyalty. Just clarity. Within minutes, the effect rippled. Mutual friends began to share the post, often accompanied by comments like, "Makes sense now," or "Wow, I didn't realize that." The narrative she had tried to spin was cracking, splintering under the weight of objective truth. Mira, the secondary antagonist and constant amplifier, reacted poorly. Within 24 hours, her own social media accounts became a battleground. She posted defensive stories, screenshots of messages attempting to justify the prior events, explanations that tried to frame her actions as supportive guidance. Each post contradicted the last. Friends began unfollowing. Mutual acquaintances sent private messages, questioning her integrity. By the third day, she was muted in several group chats, and her attempts to regain social authority were met with skepticism. Meanwhile, the ex continued her posts, escalating with each hour. She tried subtler forms of gaslighting, images of herself looking contemplative, cryptic captions about misunderstandings and trust lost. She even attempted another public performance, a video of her walking through the plaza, as if reclaiming it, but the context had shifted. Observers knew the truth. The public moment she tried to control no longer belonged to her narrative. I read everything silently. I didn't defend myself. I didn't clarify. I didn't argue. I didn't respond because every reaction would have invited engagement, given her the stage she craved. Calm withdrawal had already done more than any argument could achieve. The crowd had seen the collapse. The evidence was public. No further explanation was necessary. Weeks passed. Mutual friends began to rearrange their allegiances. Some quietly removed themselves from her orbit. Others reached out to me privately, but not to congratulate. Just to confirm that the story matched what they'd observed. Manipulation had been planned, exposure had occurred, and she was responsible for her own unraveling. I maintained my routines. My work. My home. My small, ordinary life that had been consistently stable throughout the drama. I didn't seek recognition or validation. I didn't post about her collapse or Mira's mistakes. The silence I maintained publicly amplified the exposure organically. Occasionally, messages appeared in my inbox. Curious observers, friends I hadn't spoken to in months, even strangers who had followed the unfolding drama online. They asked questions like, did she really plan it all? Or was it really staged? I answered with clarity and brevity, yes. And the rest is what happens when manipulation meets refusal. That was all. No gloating. No triumph. No emotional display. Nothing performative. The calm persisted, unshakable. It became a template for the truth to follow naturally, without me needing to inject myself into the chaos. Social media moved on. Some people, curious or entertained, continued discussing the events in private messages or comment sections. But the narrative had shifted permanently. The orchestrated humiliation was recognized for what it was, a performance. The intended victims, the audience, and the manipulators had all observed the failure of the manipulation. Months later, she attempted one last social media post. A long caption story about growth, reflection, and learning to respect others' emotions. Friends commented with encouragement, but the momentum had shifted. Subtle whispers of her prior manipulations circulated quietly, confirmed by people who had seen the real events unfold. Her credibility had been eroded without confrontation, without exposure from me, simply by allowing the truth and the collapse of her public performance to speak for themselves. Mira faded from social media influence entirely. Her stories no longer commanded attention. Mutual friends who had previously amplified her commentary began avoiding her accounts entirely, either privately or publicly distancing themselves. The secondary antagonist had collapsed socially in a way that was precise and quiet, proportional to the exposure that had been organically produced. I continued to live my life with consistency and normalcy. Weekends were spent running errands, reading, working, cooking. I maintained routines, small pleasures, and daily commitments without performing for anyone. The calm I had cultivated throughout the entire ordeal now served as a natural barrier, not a statement. It was the environment in which peace took root. The ex attempted private messages months later, brief, apologetic, curious if I was still hurt or angry. I read them once, then archived the conversation. No reply. There was no need. Closure wasn't about confrontation or response. It was about disengagement, about living in a space that she could no longer influence. By the end of the year, the social fallout was complete. The orchestrated humiliation, the manipulative performances, the attempts to reclaim control, all had failed. The exposure had occurred without me needing to intervene actively. She had collapsed socially, her sister had confirmed the truth publicly, and the secondary antagonist had faded. The audience, both witnesses at the plaza and online observers, recognized the discrepancy between performance and reality. I never gossiped. I never posted evidence. I never dramatized the narrative. The calm withdrawal, the refusal to perform, and the natural consequences of exposure had done the work. The last time I thought about the events consciously, I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking a coffee I didn't need, listening to the morning hum of the city. It was ordinary. Quiet. Uneventful. Peaceful. No one called. No one posted. No one expected anything from me anymore. And that was the ending, in the only way it could have been truly satisfying. Not loud, not performative, not vengeful. Just relief. Peace. Silence. For the first time in months, I felt nothing I had been chasing externally, no audience validation, no need to prove control. The manipulator had been exposed. The secondary antagonist had collapsed. The truth was public, and I had disengaged completely. The plaza, the fountain, the laughter, the performance, all had become memories. Not scars. Not trophies. Just markers in time of what happens when manipulation meets refusal. I poured another cup of coffee, sat down, and let the quiet fill the room. The story had ended not with drama, but with clarity. Not with triumph, but with relief. Not with spectacle, but with peace. No one witnessed it but me, and that was enough. Silence.